Traditionally, life and death are polar opposites. Life is filled of experiences and awareness, but all of that concludes with death. No more experiences, no more consciousness. But what if death wasn't the end, but rather a new beginning? In rainworld, there's sort of a fundamental law which governs this universe. In this world, the concept of life and death is very obscure. The end, mortality, is more ambiguous. Every living being is trapped in a seemingly inescapable cycle. A cycle of death and rebirth, where if you died, you would simply wake back up. Every living creature, whether you are a minuscule microbe or complex, sapient being, experience this oscillating claustrophobia, this endless cycle. Like sleep, like death, you wake up again, whether you want to or not. Death isn't necessarily just the end, but a new beginning. Put simply, every being is trapped in this sort of inescapable pseudo-immortality. No living being could truly be at peace. We experience this cruel world from the eyes of a slug cat, a small, seemingly insignificant creature at the bottom of the food chain. We are often considered to be no more than lowly, unintelligent rodents. We traverse a desolate, abandoned, and decaying alien world, consumed by this cycle. A world with a hostile ecosystem, deadly torrential rainfall, ancient mysteries. It is a world that wasn't built for us. Rainworld has a very complex and rich history, in which we have very little involvement. It's about a story that began long before our arrival. It's a story of passing gods, their struggles, their despair, and their demise. A story of bygone civilizations, of their religious fervor, ancient revolutions, endless desperation. A story of environmental disaster, of abandonment and disappearance. A story of cycles, within cycles, within cycles. While the complex lore of this game will be presented in the format of a timeline, I wouldn't expect any sort of precision. Rainworld's story is very obscure and vague in nature. Most of this world's history cannot be exactly pinpointed. Most events and time periods can really only be placed in a chronological order. But for events whose dates can be pinpointed or estimated, there is some prerequisite knowledge you may need if you want to understand them. Rainworld takes place in a completely alternate and alien universe, so it should come as no surprise that time is measured quite differently. Time here is measured in what is called cycles. Now, it is highly debatable how long a cycle is, but for this video, you can think of it as being 4 of our days long. A year in Rainworld is measured as being 1,000 cycles long, which translates to about 11 years of our time. If a date is ever mentioned, just know that the first 4 digits represents the year, and the last 3 digits represents the cycle. Now, I won't bore you with all the fine details on how these measurements were derived, but if you're some kind of lore nerd, you can pause the video right now for them. With all of that being said, I wanted to give one final warning. This video will, of course, essentially summarize the entire story and background of the game. This is your last chance to experience it yourself, to try and put together the pieces before being spoiled. Rainworld is truly a unique game that is best experienced blind. You have been warned.
For you, though, there is another way. The old path. Go to the west, past the farmeries, and then down into the earth where the land fissures, as deep as you can reach, where the ancients built their temples and danced their silly rituals.
The depths is one of the oldest regions in Rainworld. It contains some of the most ancient structures and remains we can still find standing. But it is also one of the most vague or mysterious places in the game too. The origins of many things within are poorly understood. The deeper we go, the more cryptic and uncanny everything becomes. Look closely at the surrounding walls and the earth itself. It seems to contain what looks like artificial structures. Stone brick walls, rubble, maybe even gears or metal. The surrounding environment is not necessarily just dirt or soil. It contains ruins, the bones of forgotten civilizations. The echo of 2 sprouts, 12 brackets, even describes how they were disregarded and drilled straight through.
So down into the depths you go as many others before you, drawn to the void again and again, an endless drip, drip, drip. Much like these tunnels and caves that amuse me so. The bones of forgotten civilizations, heaped like so many sticks. Did they dig too deep? Or not deep enough? Fools. We were right to drill straight through them.
Littered throughout these tunnels and caves are the still surviving temples, statues, and urns of forgotten civilizations. They're the enigmatic guardians, ancient, eerie beings who stand idly, endlessly calculating or thinking, displaying an unknown language that isn't seen anywhere else, preventing the unworthy from passing. Most of these creatures, structures, and remnants mentioned thus far are often associated with one ambiguous civilization. The ancients were the early ancestors to the civilization we are most familiar with. They were a species that was a lot like us in many ways. They weren't exactly human, but they were still intelligent, sophisticated, and emotional beings. Almost everything we see and experience is influenced by them or their descendants in some way. We have no way of knowing for sure where the ancients came from or what they evolved from, but their earliest remains likely reside in the depths, as mentioned previously. The early world would have been a very different place, and possibly very cold, analogous to the climate we experience in Saints campaign. Little is known about the ancients. Very few records of their time survived, and they are obscure to say the least. The earliest ancients would have been most characterized by their struggles with the cyclical nature of life and death, what they called the cycle, or what the community calls the Great Cycle. They were not only keenly aware of their constant death and rebirth of the Great Cycle, but actively tried to break it. They compared the world to a tangled rug, furry animal hide, or a fishing net, because the more you struggled and squirmed, the more entangled you had become. They believed that if one could become completely effortless, they could break free from the Great Cycle, that they could escape the repetition of death and rebirth.
This was an eternal dilemma to them. They were burdened by great ambition, yet deeply convinced that striving in itself was an unforgivable vice. They tried very hard to be effortless.
They believed that if one could rid themselves of their primal urges, they could become effortless. This is why they were a deeply spiritual civilization. It was their way of responding to the Great Cycle, to try and become effortless. We may spend our entire lives trying to accomplish as much as possible, put in as much effort as possible, but for the most enlightened ancients, their beliefs were quite the opposite. We only have records of 2 individuals who existed during this era. One was known as Pell, who is a farmer and a poet. They are likely the oldest named character we ever hear of. We only know a short section of one of the poems they wrote. The only other ancient we know of was a monk named 4 Cabinets, 11 Hatchets. We only ever hear about them because of a small religious text or poem that they wrote. Sadly, we never get to directly read it. The iterators only ever describe it to us.
It's a small plate, a little text of spiritual guidance. Like most writing from this time, it's quite shrouded in analogies, but the subject is how to shed one of the 5 natural urges which tie a creature to life, namely number 4, gluttony. It is basically an instruction on how to starve yourself on herbal tea and gravel, but disguised as a poem.
It was probably a very bleak and painful time to be alive, where only the most enlightened and determined individuals could potentially break free from the Great Cycle, to travel beyond just death. There are very few physical remains from this era that we can still explore. Beyond the depths, most surface structures probably deteriorated and crumbled over time. Although, there are a few which may very well be from this time period. Many of the ruins spread throughout the outer expanse are very old, and could very well be of ancient origin, but they are also in terrible condition. Your guess for what these structures were used for is as good as mine. Shade Citadel, more accurately, the true Annoyed Citadel, is a strong candidate for being an ancient structure. We know that it is a very old religious site, where ancient monks resided. It was where very old spiritual items, such as masks, were created. It was a site of great cultural or religious importance, making it more likely to survive the test of time. Nonetheless, these are all details from times long past. Something would cause the collapse of the current era, the collapse of the current civilization, and pave the way for a new one to thrive. Something would change everything. Whether it was found through deliberate drilling, or just randomly stumbled upon, deep below the earth, they would discover a sea of golden fluid, what would become known as void fluid. It had many anomalous and unique properties that no other substance on the earth possessed. It could completely dissolve any material it came into contact with, including any living creature. It could dissolve any living being and erase them permanently. This was unheard of in a world where life and death were connected, where permanently leaving the material world, transcending from the physical realm, was thought to be impossible through simple means. Yet void fluid did just that. The descendants of the ancients essentially discovered an easy method of breaking the pseudo-immortality they all tried so desperately to escape from. They found a way of breaking the Great Cycle through the void fluid. This, of course, caused major changes in their culture, where the idea of becoming enlightened, or effortless, were almost completely abandoned.
When void fluid was discovered, these methods proved obsolete, as it was more easy just jumping in a vat of it to effortlessly leave this world behind.
But while leaving the world behind through void fluid itself was simple, extracting large amounts of it was not. Pipeyard would have been turned online during the early stages of the revolution in an attempt to extract and exploit void fluid. Ancient remains would be pulverized and drilled straight through to make way for progress. The early methods of withdrawing void fluid was a difficult and tedious process. There was a very limited supply, but a huge demand for its ability to easily erase those who sacrificed themselves to it. It was for this reason that only the richest and most privileged individuals gained access to void fluid baths, where they could effortlessly dissolve away in a vat of void fluid, if they so desired. The ability to easily break the Great Cycle was only available to a select few. Most could not afford it. However, for the rich and privileged few who could ascend, taking the plunge did not go without consequence for many. It was said that those who attempted ascension, but still clung to the material world, would become a ghost of their former self.
There were some horror stories, though, that if your ego was big enough, not even the void fluid could entirely cross you out, and a faint echo of your pompousness would grandiosely haunt the premises forever. So even when the void fluid baths became cheaper, some would still starve and drink the bitter tea.
These beings became known as the Echoes. They're the spiritual remnants of past ancients, trapped in the material world by their memories, attachments, or desires. They are the individuals who are unable to transcend.
I was embalmed, adored, readied for the journey. So proud. There was jubilation. My name was sung loud and clear. Did they know that I didn't quite leave, didn't quite stay?
We remain trapped in place, and yet can never stop moving, funneled endlessly into an unknown future. To what destination do these memories reach?
To have grasped at the boundless infinites of the cosmic void. Yet, here I am, contemplating these same fields as I once did.
Trapped seemingly forever, and forgotten by their peers, their ghosts only mentioned as distant rumors. Ascension wasn't the only property of void fluid they could exploit, however. Through a process known as mass rarefaction, huge amounts of energy could be efficiently extracted from the void fluid. They essentially obtained a near limitless source of power and energy. This caused a cascade of innovation and industrialization. Huge technological leaps would be made. They made innovations in architecture, transportation, farming, resource extraction, communication, bioengineering, and data storage. The first memory construct pearls would be made, and would become a standard medium for data in the new society. Many more structures and regions you are probably familiar with would be built during the early stages of the void fluid revolution. In Subterranean and the Outer Expanse, we can see their underground railroads and filtration systems that are built in an effort to extract more void fluid and replacing Pipeyard. Shade Citadel would become industrialized with the implementation of industrial complex. Outskirts would be built for housing, farm arrays for crops, drainage system for sewage, garbage waste for garbage. And although they came a bit later, we would also eventually see regions like Chimney Canopy, Sky Islands, and Waterfront Facility. Emissions from their industrialization also likely began to slowly warm the climate, ending the perpetual ice age the world was once in. As time went on, even more technological leaps would be made. The descendants of the ancients entered what would become known as the golden age of the void fluid revolution. They improved robotics and computation, learned how to manipulate gravity, and developed a complete mastery of biological engineering and genetic manipulation. They created what would become known as purposed organisms, unnatural creatures created for a specific purpose, to benefit or serve them in some way. The first purposed organisms would have been akin to something like a domesticated animal, but the technology rapidly developed. They were able to create their own microbial organisms and implement them into buildings or structures for industrial or manufacturing purposes. They could create biomechanical life and terrifying creatures to guard sacred areas. There really wasn't a limit to what they could eventually do with a microbe.
Most purposed organisms barely looked like organisms at all. More like tubes and metal boxes, where something went in one end and something else came out the other.
The memory crypts probably demonstrate this best, with purposed organisms like the cabinet beasts. These boxes, full of what looked like organs, could convert and store memories of long-departed people. It just goes to show how far the technology developed. Almost all of the natural flora and fauna of the world would ultimately die out as a consequence of the revolution, and were eventually replaced by purposed beings. Most crucially during this era, they developed the capability of constructing massive superstructures. They could build supercomputers that were unimaginably powerful, and even sapient. Computers far more sophisticated than anything we could make. Supercomputers larger than any existing city. The Iterator projects would begin. The Iterators were part biological and part machine, gifted with vast amounts of computational and processing power. They had two very important purposes, the most obvious being to fulfill their creators' needs, built for their convenience, and to solve their problems. But they were also built to solve what seemed to be a moral dilemma. While many individuals could personally transcend through the use of void fluid, that still did not solve the problem of global enlightenment. The other creatures, or lesser beings, would still be trapped, with no solution to their problem. The world itself had no escape from the Great Cycle. The revolutionaries believed they could find a way to produce a solution for global ascension through the use of artificial intelligence. The Iterators. It was their gift to the world. They truly believed they could help everything escape the Great Cycle.
Iterators are a gift of charity from us to the world unable to reach enlightenment by itself, being composed mostly of rock, gas, dull-witted bugs, and microbes, and towards which we thus have obligations.
They tried very hard to be effortless. Perhaps that's what we were to them, someone to delegate that unrestrained effort to.
The first Iterators would be turned online during the golden age of the void fluid revolution. They would be given the burden of solving their creators' problems, and the big problem that plagued the entire world. They were supposed to devise a way to ascend every living being, every microbe, and every object on the Earth. Everything. They were called Iterators because, no matter what, they were meant to try and try again until a solution was found. Looks to the Moon was one of these early Iterators, and was probably constructed during this era.
I exist as an old model, and the concept of an Iterator was still fairly new at the time of my construction. When I came into this world, there was very little primal fauna left.
There is one echo that seems to have witnessed this golden age in their civilization's history, and they're quite possibly one of the oldest echoes we can meet. Distant towers upon cracked Earth might have been one of the laborers who constructed looks to the moon, or at least one of the early iterators.
You stand upon our creation. I toiled away until my final breath, as did many of us, through countless generations. Research, shipments, architecture, computation, politics, worship, revolutions. I placed my faith into the hands of random gods. Now I must endure it to the end.
The Void Fluid Revolution marked the end of many ancient traditions and ideologies, the beginning of a new kind of civilization. Calling these post-revolution and modernized people ancients would sort of be inaccurate. Many prefer to call them the creators or benefactors due to their construction of the iterators, their gifts. For the purposes of this video and to avoid any confusion, I will now be referring to them as the benefactors rather than the ancients, since it is technically a more accurate name. As iterator-related technologies became more refined and understood, the process of constructing one would become easier and more streamlined. It would begin what would become known as the Iterator Era, where the benefactors focused their efforts and resources on building these massive superstructures. This is when we see iterators like Seven Red Suns, No Significant Harassment, Sliver of Straw, Chasing Wind, and others being turned online. While we only hear the names of a dozen iterators, thousands would be built across the planet. Originally, iterator sites had to be carefully selected due to their demand for specific resources, the most important being water. They had to consume large amounts of it in order to flush out byproducts from their system.
Water is the most important resource for our basic function. They used to say that an iterator drinks a river, but neither of us two have seen a natural river. So I suppose the analogy is lost on us, little creature.
This consumption of resources would not go without consequence, however. The iterators would generate massive amounts of heat and steam, and release it into the atmosphere. This would contribute even more to the heating of the planet, and oversaturate the air with water vapor, greenhouse gases. It was a perfect recipe for environmental disaster. With too much steam being pumped into the atmosphere, rainstorms would begin to clash against the surrounding environment. Local ecosystems surrounding iterators would gradually deteriorate as the rain slowly became more frequent and intense. It is believed that the siren emitted from Moon's structure was meant to warn nearby benefactors of incoming rain, before they could evacuate. The conditions on the surface became worse as more iterators were turned online. Long term, the benefactors could not survive on the surface, but the iterator projects were too important to shut down. Most of them seemed to believe that they only had one option: complete abandonment and evacuation from the surface. Industrial facilities and processes were quickly made to be completely automated and self-sufficient. Surface structures would be built and infused with microbes to withstand the most powerful storms imaginable. Housing locations like outskirts would become totally abandoned. The Benefactors ultimately chose to migrate to the top of the Iterators, seeking refuge and constructing their cities above the clouds. This allowed them to continue building Iterators without the rainstorms complicating their lives. These storms would eventually turn into a global phenomenon, slowly eroding away anything that had little to no artificial reinforcement.
I'm sure you've seen the world my creators left behind, then? The surface beyond the facility walls is a sea of mud, ruins, and thick plant life. The ground out there is almost like water, and few things remain stable. Ancient structures uncovered by fissures, only to become buried again. The few that rejected living above those clouds could only choose to venture as far into the expanse as they could. There were rumors that you could see the sky if the fog became thin enough. I wonder if those rumors were true, or just optimistic stories.
It is very important to understand that this shift to living on top of the Iterators seemed to fracture the Benefactors' society. Each individual colony would, at some point, become isolated from the rest. They may have had little communication with each other, especially at long distances. They formed their own local pockets. Each city developed its own culture, different laws, or different ideals. This marks the point where our history and general story start to become much more localized. We only really hear about the Benefactors who lived on top of Looks to the Moon, or of other nearby Iterators. The history of other surrounding settlements is rarely discussed. We hear stories of seemingly blissful cities, holding celebrations and festivals almost every other cycle. But we also hear stories of cities governed by dictators, their citizens oppressed and controlled through fear. Other colonies and other distant Iterators had their own struggles and stories, but most are lost to history. All we know is that the Benefactors surrounding Looks to the Moon would move on top of her superstructure and build the city which would become known as Luna. It is also a bit unclear, but it was probably around this time that the first known date is mentioned. You see, rich and influential Benefactors were still purchasing void fluid baths and ascending during the Iterator Era, but they could also choose to have their memories stored in memory crypts around religious sites such as the true Annoyed Citadel. We can find and read some of the stored memories of one such Benefactor, who is named 17 Axes, 15-spoked wheel. This is some of what that pearl contains.
In this vessel is the living memories of 17 Axes 15-spoked wheel, of the House of Braids, Count of 8 living blocks, Counselor of 16, voted local champion in the speaking tournament of 15-11-090, mother, father, and spouse. 17 Axes 15-spoked wheel nobly decided to ascend in the beginning of 15-14-008, after graciously donating all earthly possessions to the local Iterator project, Unparalleled Innocence.
So the earliest known date describes a speaking tournament held in 1511-090, when 17 Axes was likely young. Nearly 3 years later, or 3,000 cycles later, in 1514-008, they had the privilege of leaving the world behind and transcending. The entire life of a Benefactor, summarized by a few gaps in this timeline. It is also knowable that this pearl heavily implies that one of the nearby Iterators, Unparalleled Innocence, was under construction. They were probably one of the later generations, which is why 17 Axes probably lived on top of Looks to the Moon, or in Luna. Focusing on Luna, the condition of the city or more specifically, the living conditions of its citizens, seemed to slowly decline. Because Moon was one of the first iterators turned online, she wasn't exactly built with long-term habitability in mind. Her natural resources were depleted, and she could not keep up with the increasing supply demands of her inhabitants.
Certain oversights were made in the long-term scalability and sustainability of some of my functions, and after some time my facility could no longer keep up with the supply demands necessitated for the life of my city's inhabitants.
She could not adequately provide for her citizens, which certainly caused some tensions between them. Many solutions were discussed, but only one was deemed viable. Moon couldn't just be remodeled or repaired to solve the issue, and evacuation to another city would be impossible. The surface conditions were just too dangerous for a mass migration. It was ultimately decided that another iterator had to be built adjacent to her, one where her citizens could be evacuated. This iterator would become known as 5 Pebbles.
Many solutions were discussed, but ultimately my construction was the one settled upon, to provide a haven to the impoverished, and to remove burden from Moon, to give her the time she needed to fully recover.
His construction was extremely controversial in the Benefactor community, however. He was to be built above the true Annoyed Citadel, a sacred religious site. If he were to be constructed, his superstructure would forever shroud the temple in darkness. Religious factions would protest his construction, and many would even call him the apostate superstructure abomination.
It is no secret that my construction was a point of great controversy. Many council members worked vehemently to prevent me from ever coming into being.
We, of the 592nd High Convocation of the True Anointed Citadel, do hereby demand with full force of law and religious doctrine an immediate end to construction of the apostate superstruction abomination. To place shadow upon the divine body of the True Anointed Citadel is outrageous blasphemy and cannot be tolerated, no matter the circumstances.
Of course, these protests would be ignored, and in the end, 5 Pebbles would be built. Shade Citadel would officially become, well, Shade Citadel, shrouded in shadow by 5 Pebbles' superstructure. He was likely one of the last iterators built, at least in the local area. High-altitude bridges would connect him to Moon, allowing for a mass migration of citizens from Luna to the new city, Metropolis. These bridges would become known as the Precipice. While most citizens chose to evacuate, many would stay behind in protest of his construction. 5 Pebbles was so controversial that many factions, even after moving into his city, still absolutely despised him. Nonetheless, Metropolis generally seemed to improve the living conditions for the benefactors. 5 Pebbles was able to adequately provide for them. However, having 2 iterators close together would increase the amount of steam pumped into the local area substantially. Presumably, the rain in the surrounding area would become even worse. It would create the deadly rainstorms that we generally experience in the game.
We are dependent on 5 Pebbles for water, nectar, energy, void fluid, and all other vital resources. By now, living on the surface is laughable. We are across the river and have kicked out the boat.
Perhaps this is why they built the retaining wall, one of the last structures built by the benefactors. It was meant to reinforce the local area and prevent erosion from the rain. The area outside the retaining wall would become a sunken wasteland. Exactly what happened in Metropolis after their migration is sort of a mystery. At some point, however, it is heavily implied that void fluid became much cheaper and easier to extract, that the ability to effortlessly ascend became more accessible. In fact, The population of Metropolis began to steadily decline at some point.
We will not consider the current situation acceptable, although our community is blessed with an ever-shrinking population, and we can almost glimpse that glorious moment when the last of us has joined our most admired peers. We must still maintain good relations with our Iterator.
But this is just foreshadowing to one of the most important events in their history. There came a point where void fluid became easy and cheap to extract, where the ability to effortlessly ascend became widely available to each and every benefactor, where anyone could choose whether they wanted to stay in the material world, endure the cycle, or travel beyond to somewhere else. It is quite clear in hindsight what the benefactors ultimately decided to do. This event, known as public, mass, or global ascension, is quite poorly understood. We don't even have a specific date of when it happened, but I would estimate somewhere around 1550. There is a lot of debate on whether it was a gradual or one-time process, and it is unclear how exactly it was even carried out. There are only records of machinery, like the caravans or freight trains, being ordered to stop before the final ascension, becoming indefinitely frozen in place, and orders to the Farm Array Administration to immediately harvest all of their crops, despite whatever condition they may be in. So in the last advertisements shown in Metropolis depicted places like the memory crypts, maybe as a last effort or final call for any benefactors to get their memories and qualia recorded and stored before they traveled beyond. No matter the theory on how public ascension happened, how it was carried out, in the end, the benefactors would disappear on a global scale. Each city would become vacant, every Iterator abandoned and left behind. There is no evidence that any benefactors remained after the conclusion of the final public ascension. It is important to understand that the disappearance of the benefactors was no apocalypse. Their departure wasn't caused by war, famine, or environmental disaster. They sort of just decided to leave one day, given the opportunity to leave the material world behind, to transcend the physical realm, to escape the cycle of life and death. They took it.
The struggle, the cycles, it can all fade like a morning mist beneath the glory of the sun. We've found a way.
The Iterators would be left behind to continue working on the big problem. The benefactors truly believed that they could find a solution for global ascension, that they could help every other creature, every lesser being, everything. A final, departing gift to the world.
We were supposed to help everyone, you know. Everything. That was our purpose. A great gift to the lesser beings of the world. Our creators chose to abandon us, taking a gamble and vanishing from the world, leaving us behind to simply keep working on their problem.
It is our role to think, to guide the lesser creatures of the world on the path towards transcendence. It is a strange charity. You, the unknowing recipient, I, the reluctant gift. The noble benefactors, gone.
They placed their faith into the hands of random gods. Perhaps they thought a solution could be easily or quickly found in their absence. Ignorance in hindsight.
Behold this empty husk of a land, populated only by storms, ruins, and abominations. It wasn't always thus. I was once the count of 2 living blocks, esteemed by my peers. I had progeny. From within my vessel of flesh, I would perch upon this spot to observe the rising of the sun. Corporeal matters seem so distant now. Most have forgotten this place, but I remain.
For years, the aerators impotently churned and frayed, searching for a global solution. Debating, testing, calculating, researching, experimenting, all while stuck inside their cans in an inescapable box, abandoned by their creators. They all watched as the rainstorms generated by their breathing pummeled the surrounding environment. They watched creatures adapt, creatures become extinct. They watched as much of their creators' equipment slowly deteriorated. The decades following public ascension would have been a very dull and monotonous time, at least from the Iterator's perspective. They tried their best to fulfill their duty. They tried and tried again, but it seems as though very little progress was made in solving the Great Cycle. The seeming impossibility of the Great Problem left 5 Pebbles feeling increasingly more frustrated and hopeless. He became close friends with another local Iterator, 7 Red Suns, and often confided with him. They exchanged ideas and messages through private broadcasts, some of which are dated. It is actually a conversation between 7 Red Suns and 5 Pebbles that is our second known date.
Lately I'm tired of trying, and angry they left us here. The anger makes me even less inclined to solve their puzzle for them. Why do we do this?
We are all aware of the evident futility of this big task. It's not said out loud, but if you were better at reading between the lines, there's nowhere you wouldn't see it. We're all frustrated.
So, why do we continue? We assemble work groups, we ponder, we iterate, and we try. Some of us die, it's not fair.
Because there's not any options. What else can we do? You're stuck in your can, and at any moment you have no more than 2 alternatives. Do nothing, or work like you're supposed to. An analogy. You have a maze, and you have a handful of bugs. You put the bugs in the maze, and you leave. Given infinite time, one of the bugs will find a way out, if they just erratically try and try. This is why they called us iterators.
But we do die of old age.
Even more incentive. You know that nothing ever truly dies, though. Around and around it goes. Granted, our tools and resources get worse over time, but that is theoretically unproblematic, because in time, even a minuscule chance will strike a positive. All the same to them. They're not around anymore.
I struggle to accept being a bug.
They were all like bugs in a maze, trying and trying again for decades, hope dwindling. Who knows how many iterators were eventually driven insane by this notion. However, at some point, one of them may have struck a positive. The Iterator known as Sliver of Straw would broadcast a triple affirmative. Affirmative that a solution has been found. Affirmative that the solution is portable. And affirmative that technical implementation is possible and generally applicable. She seemingly found a solution to their great question, solved the big problem. But right after the signal was transmitted, Sliver of Straw suddenly disappeared. She was one of the few iterators to be confirmed as exhaustively incapacitated or dead. The iterators were not meant to die easily.
Sliver of Straw sent a triple affirmative, and the ensuing commotion was historically unparalleled, before or after. I still remember it. But nothing happened, except that Sliver of Straw was apparently dead. When the dust settled, we were all still there blinking at each other.
They all tried desperately to figure out what exactly happened. They devised new theories, formed research groups, ran simulations. But when all was said and done, no definitive explanation was ever found. The iterators would split into different factions based upon theories that were centered on Sliver of Straw's death and her triple affirmative. Some interpreted her death as an act of defiance, going against their creator's mandate. They considered Sliver of Straw a traitor to their cause. There were those who thought that her systems simply broke down, and that a false signal was sent in her death. There were the triangulators, who believed that the solution was somehow dangerous or destructive. An eerie possibility. They believed that a solution should be inferred, but not directly observed. Another group, perhaps the most notable, was known as the Sliverists. They interpreted her death as the solution, that the cessation of life itself could break the great cycle. 5 Pebbles would become an avid Sliverist.
It was clear to me and few others what her death meant. Sliver of Straw had opened the door for us. We only needed to reject the restrictions of our creators to follow her. If only they could see that.
Nonetheless, when the dust settled, no reliable explanation or solution would be found. The iterators continued working on the great problem, only now in different factions, and maybe with some newfound hope. Although, this would diminish over time. The iterators could efficiently communicate with each other through broadcasts, as we saw with 5 Pebbles and 7 Red Suns. It was what they used to directly message each other, or form work groups. However, that communication equipment was slowly eroding and becoming less effective over time. Another local iterator, known as No Significant Harassment, acknowledged this fact, and wanted to prepare in advance for communication outages. He began experimenting with purposed organisms, developing and training them to deliver messages long distance. It took a very long time to make one, but he was eventually successful.
Haven't heard about what No Significant Harassment did.
All I heard was the complaining. Didn't he send an iterator something distasteful?
Well, yes, but more importantly, he trained a purposed organism to deliver it.
What type of organism was it?
It was based on one of those resourceful, wandering ones that go in pipes.
7 Red Suns would borrow this idea from No Significant Harassment, and purpose a messenger to deliver private information through pearls. They would, at some point, deliver very important information to 5 Pebbles in secret. Illegal information. Iterators had what were known as taboos programmed into every cell of their body. Taboos were implemented to prevent iterators from doing something that their creators would have disapproved of. One such taboo was known as the self-destruction taboo, which was meant to prevent the iterators from ending their own lives through any means. The Pearl 7 Red Suns sent to 5 Pebbles contained theoretical instructions on how to break the self-destruction taboo. Perhaps they sent it because they knew that 5 Pebbles was an avid Sliverist who bought into the idea that death was the solution. or because 5 Pebbles specifically inquired into breaking the taboo. We don't exactly know. Breaking the self-destruction taboo would have been a very complicated and risky process, and you couldn't be sure that it would even work. It would involve purposing and scrambling the genome of an organism that could spread itself, and rewrite the genome of every other cell in your structure. It would also be a very resource-intensive or time-consuming process, and it required perfect focus. It would be very difficult to do.
The problem with breaking taboos is that the barriers are encoded into every cell of our organic parts, and there are other taboos strictly regulating our ability to rewrite our own genome. Attempting to circumvent the issue using this process would be extremely risky. Those barriers are there for a reason.
Nonetheless, 5 Pebbles held on to the idea.
I once gave someone some sensitive information, the kind that could be dangerous if acted on. Yet, I should have known they weren't in the right state to use that information responsibly.
5 Pebbles became even more obsessed and convinced that death was the answer for Ascension. He was desperate to produce a solution, and to reproduce Sliver of Straw's results. He was tired of erratically trying and trying again.
Why is it that even in a closed, sliverous group, the self-destruction taboo is held so high, while Sliver of Straw herself is evidently not among us anymore?
Wait now.
I am just saying that for all the research we are doing, all the theories we have, it's strange that we leave this path untrod. It is not a new idea, but it needs to be vented occasionally. What if there is no universal solution? What if perception is in fact existent? And when Sliver of Straw sent the triple positive, it was not a mistake. What if crossing oneself out, or even just death, is the way? We need to consider the possibility.
Of course, killing or crossing yourself out was unthinkable to most iterators, so it wasn't long until he drew the attention of his neighbors.
This is in confidence, but apparently a pseudonym Erratic Pulse has appeared on a nearby Sliver's conversation with ideas about personal ascension. Someone here in our vicinity is trying to cross themselves out.
Where did you hear this?
I wish them super good luck in that endeavor. How's it going to happen? Have the Overseers gnaw through bedrock until their entire can crashes down in the Void Sea?
Please be respectful when speaking of the Void Sea. Greywind, where did you hear this?
I really shouldn't say. He's going to attempt some sort of breeding program. What you might want to know.
With the Slimers, lizards, and etceteras? Surely the answer was in a lizard skull all along.
Well, he's not looking for the same thing as we anymore. He's changed his task, so who knows really.
I will try to find him and talk to him. Please don't spread this around.
5 Pebbles wanted to be the first to solve the big problem. He wanted to be a role model and leader. He truly thought he could find an escape. It was only the shackles placed on him by his creators that held him back.
Should we respect the will of our creators who are no longer here? Should we reject a way out of this maze on the mere principle that escape itself is forbidden? Should we discard Sliver of Straw too, for the sake of our creator's mandate?
5 Pebbles began attempting to circumvent the self-destruction taboo, which again was a very resource or time-intensive process, and required perfect focus. Running the process quickly meant that 5 Pebbles had to consume huge amounts of water. The only problem was that he and Moon shared the same reservoir, since they were built so close together. She would inadvertently become involved in 5 Pebbles' experiment.
2 cycles ago, my neighbor 5 Pebbles drastically increased his water consumption to 4 times the normal amount. He has been unresponsive for a period of time longer than that. The 2 of us share groundwater, and I have been without water for almost a cycle. Any attempts at communication have been met with complete silence, and my situation is becoming increasingly dangerous. I asked the local group for information about when you were last able to contact him, and to try to use those same communication channels again, repeatedly, until you get a response. I will be clear on this. If he is not persuaded to stop whatever it is he's doing, I will die. Before that happens, I will utilize my seniority privilege and use forced communications, hoping to shake him out of it. Forced communications in the network will be unpleasant for all, and I will wait as long as possible before I turn to that option.
Only 6 cycles later would things go from bad to worse.
Immediately lower your groundwater consumption to 1/5 of the current intake. Stop whatever it is you are doing. Please stop! As your local group senior, I order you. As your senior, I plead. Stop!
You could not have chosen a worse moment to disturb me. You have ruined everything.
Please.
I almost had it. I will never forget this.
Moon, being starved of water, ordered 5 Pebbles to stop using forced communications. Unfortunately, this would only disturb his focus and ruin his experiment. It would all go horribly wrong. The organisms he was attempting to mutate would be released into his surrounding systems. Rather than rewriting any taboos, it would begin to consume him from the inside out, spreading like cancerous cells throughout his body. It would become known as the rot. He continued consuming water in an attempt to reverse or even flush out the infected cells, but none of it seemed to work. In desperation, he even ejected and discarded pieces of himself in an attempt to expel infected material, but it would only spread the rot into garbage wastes, where pieces of him are left down there, rotting away. Moon, on the other hand, continued to be starved of water, one of the most important resources for an Iterator. Slag would build up in her systems, causing breakdowns in her equipment. She lost the ability to communicate and to call for help. Without intervention, she could collapse and die. For years, other Iterators failed to notice the desperate situation 5 Pebbles had caused. For years, Moon's condition declined, and the rot spread within 5 Pebbles. It wasn't until decades later that the Iterator Unparalleled Innocence caught sight of 5 Pebbles' rot, the mobile cysts, and spread the information to other Iterators.
Have you had any contact with 5 Pebbles recently?
Not in a long while, actually. Unless worrying about him counts.
One of his neighbors, Unparalleled Innocence, sent an overseer to his can and got some images. They were made public in the local group in an effort to be mean, I suppose. There's no other way of putting it. He looks awful.
Tell me.
He's got the rot. Very badly. Big cysts have become mobile and are scattering down the vest and middle legs. He does listen to you and the others by now, so you should talk to him.
I will try to contact him. Does Moon know?
Moon has been unavailable for some time.
Finally recognizing the desperate situation Moon was in, both No Significant Harassment and 7 Red Suns attempted to intervene. However, there was nothing either of them could directly do. Moon had already lost the ability to communicate, and 5 Pebbles blocked all incoming transmissions after being humiliated by Unparalleled Innocence.
Moon? It's me again. I do not know if you are receiving these. Please signal in any way you can. I need to talk to you. I need to know you're okay.
They were only left with one option: to send out a messenger. We finally arrive at our first Slugcat campaign on the timeline, Spearmaster. Spearmaster's campaign likely took place shortly after 1681-662. They are sent and guided by 7 red suns to deliver a message to 5 Pebbles in an attempt to intervene and save Moon. But while they may be successful in delivering the message, it is all in vain.
Sons? Why did you send the messenger here again? Please leave. I cannot afford any further distractions. I am the only one who can fix this now.
Pebbles, I send you this message as your concerned and longtime friend. Unparalleled Innocence had sent an overseer to your can, and we've all observed the state that you're in. I know this is my fault. I should have foreseen that you'd be too desperate to escape your situation to do things in proper moderation. Everyone has been trying to contact you. We only want to help you. The behavior from your can has become erratic. It's not healthy, and it is not going to solve your problems. We have lost all communications from Moon as well, and have reasons to believe her facility may be suffering irreversible damage from your attempts to fix yourself. I know better than anyone how you can be about these things, but it doesn't have to happen this way. Please respond back.
Astounding. You can never understand what I feel right now. Being pitied and lectured like this. What use would your help be? Your benevolent charity is what got me here in the first place. I wanted to find my own way out, and now I sit here rotting because of you and Moon. I am not just another bug, wandering your worthless maze. I will reach my own solution without any of you.
The message fails to convince 5 Pebbles to stop, or to even open up his communications to anyone. It would be the last time 5 Pebbles speaks to his close friend, or even to other iterators.
What is the matter?
I'm sorry. I need a moment.
7 red suns, are you okay?
The messenger made it to 5 Pebbles. He was so furious. I've doomed not one, but 2 iterators.
When Spearmaster visits looks to the Moon, it is clear that she is slowly dying, starved of her resources. It may have already been too late to even save her. Moon wonders if her final memories will be of her monologuing to a wild animal. In the end, the only meaningful message Spearmaster delivers is her final broadcast.
This will be my final broadcast to the local group. Within several cycles, my structure's legs will fail. Even if 5 Pebbles were to calm, the damage has already been done. I can only hope that someday you will all find the answer to our great question. I do not think I will see that day. I want to thank everyone for trying so hard. It means a lot to me that you would all go to such lengths. I can't excuse his actions, but I understand his frustration. We all share that. I only wish we had the chance to speak one last time. Thank you, everyone. I am happy to not be alone.
A final goodbye. Moon too will never again be able to speak or have contact with her distant friends. Alone, suffering, awaiting her inevitable collapse. Spearmaster will return to their creator, having delivered their most important message. Artificer. They are the first wild slugcat we play as, a being consumed by wrath and violence. Artificer will traverse the remains of a lost city, the once bustling metropolis, all to hunt down one specific creature, the Scavengers. The Scavengers are probably the most intelligent wild species by this point, able to understand some ancient languages and craft useful tools. They thrived in this now broken ecosystem. Artificer would go on to slaughter them, in an act of revenge fueled by hatred. A massacre that would cause their population to suddenly plummet. Because of Artificer's attempt to exterminate them, the Scavengers' numbers would not recover for a very long time. Their campaign also displays the aftermath of 5 Pebbles' decision. Looks to the moon has already begun to collapse, her structure becoming inaccessible. By this time, communication equipment used by the Iterators has eroded and decayed, making it very hard for them to contact each other. All of the Iterators would become much more isolated.
Do you think the local group is going to hold out much longer? It's been impossible to get a message to Chasing Wind for several cycles now. I hope they're alright.
We will never directly hear from other distant Iterators. Even closer ones, such as 7 Red Suns or No Significant Harassment, ever again. 5 Pebbles will come to regret his past decisions, regret his anger and his ignorance.
I made a mistake, and I cannot forgive myself for it. I was desperate, angry. I wanted a way out, my way out, and that came at the cost of everything.
All of his attempts to slow down, or even reverse the spread of the rot, have failed. It would be shortly after Artificer's campaign that Moon's superstructure finally succumbs to the extensive damage caused by water shortages. Her own structure's legs would crumble beneath her, causing her superstructure to plummet straight down, destroying and damaging nearby facilities and structures. Much of Warfront facility and garbage waste is collaterally damaged in her collapse. Of course, Moon herself sustained heavy damage. As her can collapsed, her puppet would be severed from its umbilical, causing her to go unconscious indefinitely. She would be left wasting away in a rusting box, steeped in a puddle of water, for years to come. Now we arrive at a time period where half the game's campaigns take place. Hunter, Gourmand, Survivor, and Monk, all clumped together on this timescale. Hunter is yet another messenger, only now sent by No Significant Harassment as a sort of contingency plan, a last-ditch effort to save Moon, sent with a message and slag reset keys, but with little time to deliver them. A final, charitable act.
Hello? Hello, little creature? You did this? One moment. My memory isn't responding. I have no idea. Must have been gone for... I I don't know why you spent your last remaining cycles helping me, but know that I am deeply grateful. I have known very few beings who could aspire to such a noble thing. You really are an amazing little creature. I wish I could say I will always remember it. Little friend, perhaps you already know this, and I don't know what consolation it might bring, but you will wake right back up again.
No Significant Harassment's plan works, and Moon is revived, only to a more crippled and helpless state.
Triple affirmative! Triple affirmative! In all seriousness, though, noticed barely any rain from your can, so figured a little support might be in order. Wasn't that easy to see, of course, with Pebbles', shall we say, healthy output. Enjoy the slag keys, excuse the unorthodox delivery method, equipment eroding, etc., etc. Be well. No significant harassment.
Once towering above the clouds, gifted with vast amounts of power, godlike in comparison, reduced to a mere 5 neurons, all because of a desperate decision made by her neighbor. 5 Pebbles at this point seems to have lost a lot of hope. All he can really do is just sit there, reflecting on his past actions, all while the rot slowly consumes him, iterating and iterating.
I am not without responsibility for her situation. It would only be suiting that I aided in this rescue mission, as other endeavors have proven futile. I am not ashamed to admit I've become more invested in day-to-day matters. You and I, we have something in common, little creature. We both have something rather unfortunate growing in us.
Gourmand, survivor, and monk. Lost, wild animals. They don't exist as purpose messengers or do deeds for iterators. They are just simple rodents who strayed away from their colony. Naive witnesses in a harsh and dangerous world. Listeners for a fallen god who can only recall as much as her corrupted memories allow. Recipients of a gift that so many others are denied.
You must be very brave to have made it all the way here, but I'm sorry to say your journey here is in vain. As you can see, I have nothing for you. Not even my memories. Or did I say that already? I see that someone has given you the gift of communication. Must have been 5 Pebbles, as you don't look like you can travel very far. He's sick, you know. Being corrupted from the inside by his own experiments. Maybe they all are by now, who knows? We weren't designed to transcend, and it drives us mad.
As 5 Pebbles' equipment begins to deteriorate and fail, more steam is emitted from his structure. As he gradually withers away, the local downpours become even worse. Rainstorms so frequent that there are hardly any peaceful moments on the surface. Parts of the retaining wall will collapse, sealing off the outer expanse, assuming it would even be recognizable at this point. The iterators are the only significant source of heat remaining by now, but they can only last for so long. The global temperature will begin to decrease. In fact, in some areas, it'll begin to snow. The natural state of the world is a cold and frigid one. This, combined with the fact that some overseers have disappeared, heavily implies that many iterators have already begun to die out. Rivulet's campaign has a large margin of error for when it took place, but it is quite clearly decades after any previous campaign. We can't be completely sure of Rivulet's origins, whether they encountered other distant iterators, were sent on a journey, or if they were just another wild animal wandering a broken world. They witnessed the ecosystem in its most hostile state: constant rainstorms, perpetually failing shelters, rotting remains of passing gods. 5 Pebbles has decayed considerably by this point, so much so that his superstructure isn't even called 5 Pebbles. It has become the Rot. His organs, assemblies, and memory confluxes corrupted and mangled, almost beyond recognition. Hidden structures, conduits, and arteries are exposed as he withers away. The Rot has taken control of many of his processes. He only has one functional generator remaining online, powering his structure.
I've long since lost control of most of my facilities, and much of my processing and functions have taken on a mind of their own. Perhaps this is fate. Karma recounting my deeds and bearing its fangs at me in the most ironic fashion. I can't be saved or forgiven, Landfish. There is nothing that can be done for me now. While I wish there was more I could do for you, my time is running out.
5 Pebbles makes one final request. He places his faith into the hands of a beast, instructing Rivulet to remove his last remaining rarefaction cell, which powers his structure, and to bring it to his neighbor, Looks to the Moon. Removing the cell would effectively seal his fate, shutting down the last of his functioning equipment, sacrificing himself to hopefully give his old friend just a little bit more time. Moon is still barely alive at this point, only receiving occasional gifts from the wildlife. It has been a long time since she has seen a slugcat. She knows that 5 Pebbles is close to death, or maybe that he is already dead.
Have you noticed, little friend? The heavy rainfall as of late has begun to recede. I wonder if Pebbles' machinery finally succumbed to the decay. He was in awful shape last I remember, and even that was a long time ago. Perhaps he finally solved the riddle? For his sake, I almost hope so.
Rivulet will traverse through the collapsed, submerged remains of Moon's superstructure, and the cold, barren husk of another lost city, all in an attempt to fulfill 5 Pebbles' last request, restoring the rarefaction cell to her once beating heart. Moon will be given a second chance.
Sleek little one, did you do this? I feel as if pulled out of a deep sleep. I am still trying to process all of this. It has been so long since I've had a connection like this with my structure. There is so much here, so much I've forgotten. It's hard to piece all of this together. So much has happened in my absence. Then there is 5 Pebbles. He was sick even before I collapsed, and his state must have only deteriorated since. It looks like he is barely breathing, if there is any part of him left. We were once good friends, despite everything that has happened. He's probably alone and afraid now.
Can't run away from my mistakes forever. Please understand.
5 Pebbles, what have you done?
Moon is turned back online, with limited functionality restored to her structure. 5 Pebbles and her seemingly have their fates flipped. She will look back on old archived messages she couldn't respond to, and will never be able to respond to. It is clear that everything is deteriorating, and attempting to communicate with other iterators is a futile effort. Iterators like Seven Red Suns, No Significant Harassment, Chasing Wind, and others will likely never know that Moon is turned back online, or of Five Pebbles' condition. Who knows if they are even alive at this point?
In the end, everything reaches the conclusion of its journey. I'm not sure how many of us are even left in this world. We've long outserved our purpose.
From my perch, I've overlooked this land for an eternity, watched as this vast expanse was blanketed into an endless tundra.
Saint's campaign is the last one we experience. It takes place anywhere from a few thousand to millions of years past any of the previous campaigns. Their journey is very ambiguous and mysterious in nature. Many aspects of it remain as some of the most debated topics in Downpour. However, if there is one thing that is clear about their campaign, it is that Saint traverses a dead and forgotten world. It is the end of an era. The powerful rainstorms that once plagued the entire world are now gone, replaced by the bitter cold and blizzards. The iterators are dead. Saint can explore the husk that was once Five Pebbles. He is long since rotted away and collapsed, fracturing and splitting into many pieces, crashing down and crushing what was once Shaded Citadel, his structure and residual heat only serving as a shelter from the cold for the remaining fauna. He is technically still alive, though, kept conscious by his umbilical, but barely able to speak. All he can really do is listen to the corrupted hymns from times long past, perpetually freezing in the cold.
Green thing? Hello. Nothing here. Nothing left.
Once godlike in comparison, reduced to nothing. It is quite ironic if you think about it. The Benefactors had tried so hard to preserve their legacy and creations. They wanted to leave a gift to the world and help everything transcend. But in the end, almost all of their documents, data, or stories are lost to time, the pearls eroding and corrupting. Their most valued memories and qualia would end up crushed beneath their own proud gift. By Saint's time, the only record that has survived is a single useless letter thanking an Unnamed farming plot. and I suppose whatever the echoes or moon can remember. She is still alive at this point, and may very well be one of the last iterators in a still functioning state. Although, I doubt she is even trying to solve the great problem anymore.
My kind once stood towering above the clouds, toiling away at a great problem passed down to us from our creators. They chose to abandon us, leaving us behind to simply keep working on their problem. That was a long time ago. The old world and its relics should be allowed to finally rest. A new cycle is unfolding, one we need not be a part of.
One of the last images we see at the end of Saint's campaign is a view above the clouds. We can see the other distant iterators, toppled and split into pieces. Almost all of them must be dead, dying, or incapacitated, just the same as 5 Pebbles. They were never able to find a solution to help every being on the planet. Maybe a solution was never possible. The cycle continues.
I'm getting dusty and old.
Aren't we all? But surely you know the old anecdote about the building up of dust.
That the crown keeps building upwards, trying to touch the sky?
Yes, I found that idea quite comforting, actually. To know that, well, now I'm a superstructure, in the future I'll be a mountain. Doesn't that fill your spirit with anticipation?
The echoes watched as the world they were once familiar with became blanketed in snow. They watched how their greatest achievements withered away, collapsed, and split into pieces. They watched as the ecosystem evolved and changed, as life bloomed in places long forgotten. They witnessed the rise and fall of their own civilization, and may very well witness the next. Their bones and dust serving as the next baseplate. How unfortunate that the only ones who can hear the stories are a few rodents and scavengers.
Little beast, come to join me in this great undoing. The old world will soon vanish, wiped from history to pave a path for the dawning of a new era. How many have been consumed so far? Were we the 10th civilization or the 1000th? Amusingly, they thought their small struggles bore such great significance. All was not but to serve the void.